Okay, let's open a word of prayer. Father, thank you for this day. We pray that you will bless our time together today and help us to hear the things that we need to hear about what's going on in our world today. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, today we're going to call it Approaching Peak Insanity. When you get to when you're supposed to get to the peak of the market, you're supposed to sell. And so I don't know if you get to the peak of the insanity curve. I think you're supposed to get out your blankie and get out your binky and go sit in your basement, I guess, and stay away. You know, a lot of people who do these prophecy updates, and I do watch a number of them, just as sort of a check on myself to make sure I'm not kind of getting out there in crazy land. These are some of the platforms that we're on. I've not been uploading to RTN TV. I'll try to, Remnant Truth Network, I'll try to start that again. I apologize for that. It's becomes very difficult to manage all these different social platforms. So for now, I'm staying on Facebook and Twitter just because I like the platforms, but I understand that there's limitations there. I would also recommend if you do leave Facebook or Twitter, that you just not abandon your username. Because I've seen people have abandoned their username on Twitter and other social media platforms, and they've gotten somebody's cloned their account, and they're putting up stuff that they would never have put up under their original name. So just be careful about that. We're on Rumble. Blog Talk Radio has the audio, Christian Sentinel. It is, and I know people are on Parler, Gab, Telegram, MeWe, and I just don't have time to manage all of those social media accounts. So yeah, I'm an old school guy. I still use Facebook, but I understand, people are getting censored and all sorts of things. So these are some of the alternative platforms. We talk each week about the convergence of events and just how quickly things seem to be happening. I've also been doing a prophecy roundtable on Thursday nights at 8 o'clock Eastern with Doug Hamp and Scott Hartwell, and we invite people in, and we don't agree on everything, but we're just sort of talking through Bible prophecy and some of the different issues that we see, arguments that are made, and some of the things we're finding, because we do believe that we are at a time, the scripture says that at the time of the end, wise men will understand. Now, I'm not saying I'm a wise man. My wife would say I'm a wise guy, but I do want to understand the scriptures, and I think as the time of the end gets closer, it's sort of like a road sign. You see a road sign up ahead, and you can tell it's a road sign. But the details on it, you don't really know until you get closer. And that's sort of how I believe the scriptures unfold in the end times, that as we get closer, we'll have a better understanding. And as Daniel says in a number of places, the wise will understand and instruct the many. So we should be all endeavoring to be those wise people. Now, there's an argument as to who those wise people are. I understand that. I'm going to assume that that includes all of the remnant believers of God, the true believers of God. So anyway, it's a world disrupted, pretty clear, seems to be approaching midnight. I'll actually be doing a interview tomorrow with Tony Koretz from New Zealand, Minute to Midnight. So that should be up Monday night or Tuesday, whenever he gets around to it. Let's look at a couple of verses that it seems like there's so much going on that there's things that we used to talk about a lot that never get brought up. For example, we used to talk a lot about the coming apostasy, the apostasy in the church, the departure from the faith, the effects of postmodernism, the effects of mysticism. And we don't, with the geopolitics and economy and all that stuff, we've sort of neglected that area a little bit. This is a reminder. This was Rob Bell doing his Everything is Spiritual tour, and he had a whiteboard And that actually was sold on eBay. Anybody who paid more than $1 or just offered, have it shipped to my house and I'll destroy it. Because, if you read Rob Bell, we used to talk a lot about him. I think he's still around. He was very postmodern in his approach. He got worse over time. He did these tours. One of them was called Everything is Spiritual. And I used to say that if you buy a Rob Bell book, one of the things you notice is you buy the book, and there's only like 1 or 2 paragraphs stuck on a page. And so you might buy a 100-page book, but there's only a couple, they could have compressed it down to like 10 pages. And so my conclusion was that the value in Rob Bell's book, based on what he said, actually was the white space. That was what you really should have paid attention to, and not the stuff that he was saying. So the white space on the whiteboard is what you should have paid attention to with that. So let's look at some of the things that are going on. Let's get some verses for context. Used to use these verses a lot more. Likewise, this is Luke chapter 17, Jesus talking about the end times. And he's just said that as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be at the coming of the Son of Man. And then in verse 28, he says this, likewise also it was as it was in the days of Lot. They did eat, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they builded. But the same day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. So people will be acting like things are kind of going along as normal. And I think you're going to see that a lot after these lockdowns and that type of thing. People are going to say, well, look, everything's back to normal. What are we worried about? The economy's going. We all got $1,400 or whatever it was this time, like it's real money. We'll pretend that it's real money. But Lot, 2 Peter chapter 2 also describes in a little bit more detail Lot. And delivered just Lot, vexed with the filthy conversation of the wicked. For that righteous man dwelling among them, and I'm not so sure that there are a lot of reasons that I could think of to call Lot righteous, but he was deemed righteous in Scripture. I remember standing at Bethel, actually the Bethel Beitin Tower, which I believe is the site of Jacob's dream of the ladder to heaven. And also, it was at that same site that Lot and Abram had built an altar there. It's between the city of Bethel and Ai. It's very interesting geography. But when you stand there at Bethel, in this location, and you look, you can get an understanding of what happened with Abraham and Lot when they split up. And so Lot was sort of driven by his eyes. And when you stand there, you look, and what you see off in the distance is the lush green Jordan Valley, where the Jordan River is. And so Lot wanted that, and that's where he took off. And when you stand there, you get this really, you can understand, I want to go there. If we're going to split up, all this stuff up here, there's nothing growing. I'm pretty sure it was the same back in those days. Just a bunch of rock, but I want that down there. So he went down there, and of course we know what happened. But what it says, for that righteous man dwelling among them and seeing and hearing, vexed his righteous soul from day to day with their unlawful deeds. It was difficult for Lot to live in Sodom. There were things that he saw that he didn't like. There were things that he probably did that he didn't like, that he did. And so I think that's a good indication of if you look at what's going on and it bothers you, that's good. If you look at what's going on and it doesn't bother you, I think you really need to get a check on where your heart is in your relationship with the Lord, because you should be vexed by those things. And it's not so much, we don't bring them up so much to say, oh, look at those awful, evil, horrible people, what they're doing, even though that's true. They all need Jesus, and we should feel sorrow for what they're doing, because it is destructive. It's indication of their soul's eventual destruction if they don't repent and accept the Lord. We know that these things are going to change. In Matthew chapter 24, Jesus said, then shall they deliver you up to be afflicted, and shall kill you, and ye shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. Now, that means you're being hated for the name of Jesus because of what you believe. And then shall many be offended, and shall betray one another, and shall hate one another. We also need to be careful that the message that we bring from this pulpit and other pulpits is truthful. Look, there's big churches in America where they talk about having your best life now. And they may very well be prophetic in what they say, that this may be their best life now. Now, it's kind of hard to say that in light of what's gone on over the past year. Well, almost exactly 1 year all this stuff started. But here's what Jeremiah 23 had to say about pastors and shepherds and how they handled the truth of God. Woe be unto the pastors that destroy and scatter the sheep of my pasture, saith the Lord. Therefore, thus saith the Lord God of Israel against the pastors that feed my people, ye have scattered my flock and driven them away, and have not visited them. Behold, I will visit upon you the evil of your doings, saith the Lord. Verse 14. This is really a hard passage. I have seen also in the prophets of Jerusalem a horrible thing. They commit adultery and walk in lies. They strengthen also the hands of evildoers, that none doth return from his wickedness. They are all of them unto me as Sodom, and the inhabitants thereof as Gomorrah. And when you go over to a passage like Ezekiel chapter 8, you'll see in a little bit more detail exactly what was going on as Ezekiel was taken back in a vision, I think, to Jerusalem after being taken away to Babylon. The Lord showed him what was going on in the temple. And as he got further into the temple, the worse it got. In fact, when he got there, it was the priests and the leaders, the elders, who were actually leading the false worship. Jeremiah picks up on the same thing, Jeremiah 23. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, hearken not unto the words of the prophets that prophesy unto you. They make you vain. They speak a vision of their own heart, and not out of the mouth of the Lord. They say unto them that despise me, the Lord hath said, ye shall have peace. And they shall say unto every one that walketh after the imagination of his own heart, no evil shall come upon you. So we have to be careful when the message is too good. It may be a false message. I mean, Jeremiah says that that's an indication. So let's look at a few things that are going on this week. I will also say, I keep forgetting to mention this. At the end of April, there'll be a virtual conference that I'm participating in. I believe it's with Mike Gendron and Eric Barger. At least that's what I've been told. Of course, it's not going to be where we actually go to Calgary, Canada, and do things, because the Canadian government would have to go to essentially jail or prison if I could even get into Canada, assuming I was a Canadian. And have you been hearing the stories of these people that are stuck in these things when they come back to Canada? And they're paying like $2,000 for a few days in this thing. It's crazy. So I'm going to be doing talks. It's Last Days Bible Conference, lbdc.ca, and you can register there. I think there is a registration fee. And so I'm going to be working up some talks on that. I think one of them is called Deplatforming Humanity, what's going on with the Great Reset, some of the things, sort of collecting some new things that I haven't talked about yet. And then, so that'll be with Eric Barger and Mike Gendron. And I believe those will air the end of April, over about a 1 week period. So let's look at some of the approaching insanity things that are going on in our culture. Well, you saw these articles that Dr. Seuss's books, at least 6 of them, have been deemed unacceptable, hurtful to children. Mulberry Street, McElliot's Pool, on beyond Zebra. If I ran the zoo, others. eBay. What happened was the estate that runs Dr. Seuss's, or the people that run Dr. Seuss's estate came out and said, well, we've been pressured by people to take down these books because they're offensive and racist and make people uncomfortable. So we've decided to take them down. And then eBay picked up on it and said, oh, yes, we're going to not allow people to sell their used Dr. Seuss books on our platform. Now, I've never used eBay, I don't think, but pretty sure there's a lot of stuff that you can buy on eBay that's a bit offensive. But this is the way the woke crowd goes. And the push behind the banning of the Dr. Seuss books, and it's only 6, and I would say 6 so far. So there's a website, you can look it up, it's called The Conscious Kid. And this woke, he's so woke, he probably never sleeps. He's running around picking up everything out of Dr. Seuss's books. Now, there are a few that, in today's environment, you probably would not do them. But, for example, there's one that has, they're based on like historical pictures of people in China. They had the little round pointy hats and they had chopsticks. That is a racist, offensive image. Pastor Steve used to eat with chopsticks, didn't he? Yeah. And so this is the ridiculous thing that we do. Now, I think Tucker Carlson did a little bit on it the other day, and I think this is good. So I'm going to play it because I want to give him credit for what he had to say about the banning of Dr. Seuss and what's really, really behind it.
What's surprising is how calculated all this is. Now, conservatives will be tempted to chalk up the attacks on Dr. Seuss to the usual cancel culture gone mad. Look how hysterical and stupid the professional left is. They're even calling Dr. Seuss racist. And you've seen people say that on social media today. But it's totally missing the point. Canceling Dr. Seuss isn't stupid, it's intentional. They're banning Dr. Seuss not because he was a racist, but precisely because he wasn't. In 1961, Dr. Seuss wrote a story called The Sneetches. Martin Luther King's March on Washington was still 2 years away, but Dr. Seuss's story captured its essence. In case you haven't already read it to your kids 50 times and know it by heart, here's the plot. There's a group of furry, pear-shaped animals called Sneetches who live on what looks like a faraway planet. Now, if that sounds weird to you, be aware that Dr. Seuss rarely drew people, probably because he didn't want to elevate one kind of person over any other kind of person. He wasn't a racist. In any case, there are 2 groups of Sneetches in the story, those with star-shaped designs on their stomachs and those without. There's no real difference between the 2 groups, but the Sneetches don't know that. They're convinced that stars are all important. So they spend the entire story jockeying for position based on the relative starness. At various points in the story, stars on the stomach are deemed socially favorable. At others, they're considered a mark of disgrace. And the Sneetches run around frantically trying to keep up with the changing demands of star fashion, until they realize in the uplifting final pages of the story that none of it matters. Underneath the stars, they're all the same. They're all Sneetches. Who cares who's got a star? What matters isn't the group you come from. What matters is you. Even a 5-year-old gets the point of the story. At the deepest level, it doesn't matter what we look like, because underneath it all, we're all the same. We're all human beings. We're in this together. All that outward appearance stuff is pointless. It just makes people hate each other, and it makes us look ridiculous. If there's a more powerful statement on the Universal Brotherhood of Man, it's probably not in the children's section of the bookstore. For 60 years, American children have read the Sneetches and books like it. And that's one of the reasons we have the country we have today, in which most Americans, those who don't work at the universities or for the Joe Biden administration, accept Martin Luther King's most famous precept. that what matters is the content of our characters, not the color of our skins. The Sneetches affirm this. The story is a plea for colorblindness. And that's why the forces of wokeness hate it, and Dr. Seuss. When the people in charge cancel Dr. Seuss, what they're really trying to eliminate is a very specific kind of mid-century American culture, a culture that championed meritocracy and colorblindness and the superiority of individual achievement over tribal identity. These were once called liberal values. Modern liberals don't want to be reminded that they once believed any of this. If your kids are allowed to read Dr. Seuss, they will know this was a different country not so long ago, a place where people tried hard not to hate each other, a place where the population was encouraged, begged by its leaders to reject identity politics in favor of universal values and the things that connect us all. Dr. Seuss was never a major literary figure, but his memory matters more than it ever has. The battle over Dr. Seuss, what he stood for, the battle over what it means to be racist, will have consequences that extend for generations. And if we lose that battle, America is lost.
In fact, what happened was that every year there's a thing called Reading Across America. And a number of years ago, the president would issue the proclamation, would do something about Dr. Seuss, because everybody loved Dr. Seuss. And back in 2015 or 2016, during the second of Obama's now the 3 terms, President Obama got up and said, this is, and Michelle Obama, this is Dr. Seuss, he's great, you should read Dr. Seuss, have his books in your libraries. And even Obama said, you can learn a lot from Dr. Seuss. Now, there's a lot of things with Obama, they were just sort of empty words, but now Biden comes up at the beginning of Obama's 3rd term, and you can't even talk, he can't even mention Dr. Seuss because some, hyper woke, the conscious kid said you can't, these are racist. And so they're all bad. And I think Tucker Carlson is right. The only thing I would disagree with him on is he said that he mentioned modern day liberals. They're not liberals anymore. They are radical Marxist leftists that are trying to completely tear down and change the society and culture. And that goes to institutional structures. Well, that's why I called it last week, tearing it down. It goes to family, it goes to sexual relations, it goes to God's creation, it goes to government, it goes to church. They're trying to rip it all apart. And so we have to decide, what are we going to do? Are we going to stand up against it and speak truth to the exercise of their power? And it goes on a lot of different levels. Now, I'm not going to play the video that turned me on to this book because it was a video of a 3-year-old child reciting from the book the gay BCs. A is for ally, the little child said. B is for bi. G is for gay. And he goes on and on down to T is for trans. Now, I won't play the kid. I mean, it would, you would start throwing things at the screen, and I wouldn't blame you. It is very, very troubling that somebody would abuse a child like this and put it up. And that gets to stay up on YouTube, by the way. And I'm sure that if any pastor uses this, and I've seen a couple, I'm sure they're going to get docked by YouTube for using that video. But it was somebody who's woke and is trying to completely tear down the values. This thing starts very early. The Arizona Board of Education now is having a problem because they had a curriculum that came out. You can find this if you go to follow Real Christopher Rufo, RUFO on Twitter, or go to City Journal or his website, Christopher Rufo, talking about this. The Arizona Education Department has now launched an internal review after report reveals its equity toolkit traces racisms to baby. And there are graphs and charts that you can see. And in there they say that Parents, you need to watch because your child, you need to train them because they will start demonstrating racist tendencies as early as 3 months of age. Listen, these people, this is the Arizona Board of Education put that out. Listen, I'll save them a lot of money. I'll tell you what, fly me out to Arizona for 2 days, well, for a week. I will spend 2 days going around to everybody in your office telling them how stupid and moronic they are, and then I'll play 5 days of golf. So, I'll pay for my own golf. But just an airplane ticket, I probably can find somebody to stay with when I'm out there. Do you understand how sick is this? That we would allow this to happen in our culture. And now we have another bill that wants to, it's already passed the House. It's, I don't know, Tucker Carlson's talking about it with Heather Mcdonald. I'm going to play it. HR 7120. It's about police and racial profiling. They're not allowed to do it. It empowers the Department of Justice to sue them, police departments and police that don't do things the right way. It is, in fact, there's a, well, I'll let Heather talk, Tucker and Heather talk. But this is where this is, again, they're tearing it down. And you listen to Heather, she will talk about the murder rate statistics in the U.S. right now over the past year. Up 40% in many cities. We have a massive problem, and what are these woke leftists running around doing? Defund the police. What do you think is going to happen to the murder rate? And again, this is all designed, I know it's designed to get us fighting with each other, but and I get that, okay? But for crying out loud, folks, we should be fighting against this stuff and not tolerate it. You think God's going to bless America if this is going on? Here's Tucker on the talking Thursday night, I think.
Something called the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act passed the House yesterday. The legislation gives the Department of Justice the power to sue police departments if they disproportionately pull over a particular race or gender. Or gender! Pretty funny considering that men commit almost all the crimes and always have throughout history. What does this mean in practical terms? Well, it encourages cops to set up gender and race-based quotas for traffic stops, irrespective of what the people in the cars are actually doing and the crimes they've committed. Heather Mcdonald is the author of The War on Cops, which this seems like. She joins us tonight to assess. Heather, thanks so much for coming on. What do you think of this bill? What would it mean?
Well, it means passive cops and emboldened criminals, Tucker. It's based on the usual lie that racial disparities in policing are the result of police bias rather than criminal disparities in crime commission. Here are the facts about those crime disparities that the Biden administration and the Black Lives Matter industrial complex don't want you to know. In New York City, blacks commit about 3/4 of all shootings, even though they're 23% of the population. In Chicago, blacks commit about 80% of all shootings, though they're less than 1/3 of the population. In Los Angeles, blacks commit 44% of all violent crime, though they're 9% of the population. And in St. Louis, blacks commit 90% of homicides, though they're 46% of the population. These disparities are replicated in every American city. And they mean that the police cannot go where crime is happening to protect minority victims without going disproportionately into minority neighborhoods and interacting disproportionately with black criminals. Cops don't wish that reality. It's forced on them by the facts of crime. But such targeted, data-driven policing is the only way to prevent what happened last year when over 4 black children were gunned down fatally in drive-by shootings. Now, thanks to this act and the philosophy behind it, which remains absolutely powerful in the land, cops are going to back off of that kind of policing, and what we're going to see is a continuation of last year's unprecedented increase in homicides.
People in affluent neighborhoods will just hire private security as they did in the 80s, but you do wonder what happens to people who can't afford it. I guess we know.
The racism on the part of the left is incredible, Tucker. They seem to believe that if we talk about black criminals and black criminal offending, we're talking about all blacks. That is not the case. We're talking about criminals. The police are there to save the thousands of law-abiding, good black entrepreneurs, senior citizens, children who are just trying to go to school. And by tarring them as racist, you're consigning those people to terrible, fear-driven lives that will stunt their ability to seize the opportunities that remain still abundantly available in this country.
So obvious. Even, by the way, Al Sharpton said something sort of like that this summer. That this is only about assuaging the guilt of affluent white liberals and about not helping anyone else. Heather Mcdonald, thank you for that. I appreciate it.
And so what happened this week was that the Biden administration Department of Justice released race and ethnicity of violence crime offenders and arrestees in 2018. And what that report shows is that there is no racial disparity, that they focus on people who are committing crime. And as Heather Mcdonald said, no one that I know who is a conservative believes that all blacks are criminals. That is an absurd statement. It is abundantly clear, though, that everyone on the left, including the director of the FBI who testified in Congress this week, believes that all whites are white supremacists and domestic terrorists. So let's see what the next thing they're going to tear down is H.R. 1, the Equality Act, passed Congress. It was sponsored by every Democratic member of Congress. You understand that? Every single Democratic member of Congress sponsored this monstrosity. 49 of 50 Democratic senators are sponsoring it. The only one that's holding out is Joe Manchin from West Virginia. Now, if it gets around the filibuster and one Republican flips, Kamala Harris will cast the tie-breaking vote. What do you think she's going to do? If she has time. I mean, she's busy with the duties of the presidency talking to foreign leaders because I'm sure we should start a pool, not betting, just a pool. We'll send the money to a good cause. As to who has the first presidential press conference, the next presidential press conference, Kamala Harris or Joe. So H.R. 1, it will force schools, force churches that are public accommodations, that has a very broad definition of public accommodations. If you hold any kind of public event, like a community chicken supper, or maybe a political rally, you will be deemed a public accommodation, and you will have to comply with the aspects of law, or you will be sued, and you will be sued out of existence. It requires schools to allow men who are claiming to be women to use bathrooms and showers and that type of thing with kids in like high school, junior high. It requires schools to allow transgender men to participate in girls' sports. It will destroy girls' sports. There won't be a reason for them. This is already happening. So somebody did a website that's still up. I'm surprised it's not banned yet. It's called Boys versus Women. Okay, I mean, I saw a video of one of these mixed martial arts or ultimate fighting championships between a transgender woman and a real woman. I thought the woman was going to get killed. She couldn't compete with that guy. He was a monster compared to her. Now, look, there are disparities. For example, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't beat Serena Williams at tennis or anything like that. But this is just based on statistics. So here's the first one. What they did was they took the high jump, and they took the 2016 Olympic finalists and the 2016 National Boys High School finalist in the high jump. And okay, so you get the comparison. High school boys versus Olympic women, the best women in the world. Here's what happened. The blue is the boys, the red is the girls. So that all of the boys that were in finalists in the national track and field finals in high school beat all of the women. And then there's a note at the bottom, none of the women's finals performances met the qualifying distance to enter the boys' competition. And you're transphobic if you point out the facts, I guess, that men and women are different. Who's denying the science? Here's the 100 meters on the left, and then the 200 meters on the right. Here we go. And so essentially what you find, once again, is that in the 100 meters and 200 meters, all of the high school boys would have beat all of the Olympic women. And the footnote here again is, none of the women's final performances met the qualifying time to enter the boys' competition. Now, I'm not against women's sports, okay? And they've improved dramatically. I mean, I remember girls and women's basketball when I was high school and college. Some of these ladies are really, really good. But, if there was one of them good enough, do you think the guys in the NBA would not have her on board on their team? Of course they would. Because first of all, it'd be a great selling point. So it's not a slam against them, but what's going to happen is there's going to be a basketball team, football team, and they're not going to spend the time having separate women's sports if it's going to be meaningless with this transgender issue. So if this is still up after this, okay, now HR, well, here's an article from National Review. HR 1 is an authoritarian outrage. They also have a bill. I think the title of that is wrong because I think it should be HR 5, but listen to what this is, the Spectator from Australia, what they had to say about, this is written by John Fund, HR 1. HR 1 would cement all of the worst changes in election law. I think this isn't HR 5 the one that's, no, it is HR 1. HR 5 is I'm sorry, my mistake. HR 5 is the Equality Act. HR 1 is the For the People Act. What a ridiculous title this is. It's for the Democrats in Power Act. HR 1, this is from the Spectator Australia, John Fund would cement all of the worst changes in election law made in blue states in 2020 and nationalize them. Federal control of elections would be the norm, with states relegated to being colonial outposts that carry out Washington, D.C.'s mandates. Two of the amendments to impose yet more federal controls failed before final passage. But it's still a problem. HR 1 would in short order do this. It would make fraud easier by forcing states to implement early voting, automatic voter registration, same-day registration, online voter registration, and no-fault absentee balloting. It would degrade the accuracy of registration lists by requiring states to automatically register all individuals on state and federal databases. This would include many ineligible voters, including aliens. This is a way, if you like what happened in the election in 2020, you'll love this. And Kimberly Strassel, in her article, she says the Democrats are selling out their states. You know, states have the right or the Constitution to do this, and now it's changing. Here's some of the things that would be prevented. It would prevent election officials from checking the eligibility and qualifications of voters and removing ineligible voters. It would ban state voter ID laws by forcing states to allow individuals to vote without an ID and merely signing a statement in which they claim they are who they say they are. Do the banks do that, by the way? I didn't think so. Create vague and broad language that can be used to criminally charge someone who questions the eligibility of voters. So if you question somebody's eligibility, you're the criminal. Require states to restore the ability of felons to vote the moment they are out of prison. Forced disclosure, this is the ones that really bother me. Forced disclosure of names of Americans who donate to nonprofit organizations. All nonprofits organizations. All 501c3s and C4s. Why? Listen, do you remember what happened in California under Proposition 8? The amendment to ban same-sex marriage or make marriage between a man and a woman only? They went in and they dug out who had donated to the campaigns to support Proposition 8. And the guy who founded Firefox got canned. Other people got fired from their jobs. Other restaurants were shamed or protested out of existence. People lost their jobs over it. We would all be Jack Phillips, the baker of Masterpiece Cakes in Colorado. This is what's happening. It would also declare statehood for Washington, D.C. to be constitutional, despite evidence it is not. And finally, H.R. 1 would effectively ban nonprofits from contacting a member of Congress or their staff about pending legislation. Do you remember the thing about petitioning the government for redress of your grievances? These people, I'm telling you, they are tearing it all down. So you got to call your congressman and that type of thing. John Sarbanes, famed of the Sarbanes-Oxley bill for finance disclosures, is the chief author of H.R. 1, and he insisted with a straight face outside of Congress that, quote, these aren't controversial reforms. Stacey Abrams, the civil rights activist who narrowly lost her 2018 race for Georgia governor, claims that under H.R. 1, minority voters will have a right to take our seat at the table and our place at the ballot box. This will tear it all down. Here's some other things. Compel states to count mail-in votes that arrive up to 10 days after Election Day. You know, that gives people time to figure out how many votes they need and get them in. Compel states to allow ballot harvesting. It also sets up a federal commission, not bipartisan, but a federal commission to redraw congressional districts. This has always been the province of states since the founding of America. Boy, just terrible. Okay, I'm going to go through this real quick. So listen, they're putting in this green passport thing in Israel. People are upset. If you don't get your vaccine, there's a lot of things you can't do. Here's what the health ministry, here's a video that the health ministry put out about this. There's no sound in it, but what will you be able to do if you get your green passport? Well, you'll be able to go to a restaurant. You'll be able to go down to the gym and work out. You'll be able to go to a music concert, enjoy live music. You'll be able to go to the movie theater. Go to the live theater. And so that's what you have to do. You just have to get your passport to show that you've been vaccinated. And it'll show up on your phone. And this is coming everywhere. It's not just Israel. But here's the head of the EU. She says, we'll present this month a legislative proposal for a digital green pass. The aim is to provide proof that a person has been vaccinated, results of tests for those who couldn't get a vaccine yet, and then info on COVID-19 recovery. It will respect data protection, security, and privacy. Okay, she kind of lost me on that one. Should it facilitate your Europeans' lives? Is gradually enable them to move safely in the European Union or abroad for work or tourism. And this is from the COVID Pass website that they've adopted. This is put out by the World Economic Forum, Common Pass. This is what they will do. Now, the problem that Israel's had already is that there have been all kinds of safety bugs revealed in their digital green app. And I think part of the problem here in the United States is companies, employers, restaurant owners, businesses, et cetera, are concerned. Look, if I open up and somebody comes here and then I get sued because they got sick later. So there's a simple way to do that. You can't be sued if somebody got sick in your place. It's not something you can protect against with the virus. Now, the plaintiff's lawyers will go crazy. They will complain and everything. But I think that's one of the ways to open things back up. Anyway, Greyhound is concerned that they're being given these migrant passengers, and they want proof that they're COVID-free, or they're not going to take them. And the government says, oh, yeah, they all pass a COVID test before we let them loose and put them on a bus to go wherever they want. And we have this massive crisis at the border now with all these children. And the response of Jen Psaki and others is, well, we have better intentions in our heart than President Trump did. We're doing the same thing. We're using the same buildings. Here's an interesting article on the head of Pfizer. Pfizer's fast, fraud, and lucrative vaccine distribution. It talks about the fact that what Pfizer did was they went to Israel and they entered into an agreement. Israel, Netanyahu offered to pay twice they wanted $15 per vaccine. Netanyahu said Israel would pay $30. And then Israel signed up to give them all the statistics on the people and the reactions and that type. It was essentially an agreement to make Israel a research study on the vaccine. And this shows that the comparison between Israel first doses and, say, Italy. And Italy's, they're sort of, everybody's upset about it. Everybody's mad at everybody. Wall Street Journal has a good article on some of the new technologies that they're trying to develop for how to administer the vaccines, like nasal, skin patch, that type of thing. We've talked about that thing. Right now they're using shots. And we've talked about the quantum dot and the quantum dot tattoo that MIT and others, Bill Gates including, came up to. So that's still on the horizon. I think that's on the near horizon. I think that's where it's going. There's even one here that talks about an implant that you would get for the vaccine. Of course, everything will be private and secure, we're told. So here's a study that came out. Here's what's happened is pollution has dropped tremendously. It's down like 6%. It's down more in a year than they've never seen this happen before. It's just dropped. And so some of the scientists are coming out that are, global warming activists. They're saying it'd be great if we could do this every 2 years. Just lock everything down. Now, we can't use the COVID thing again. We'll have to come up with another reason to do it because we got to get the carbon emissions down. But then I read another study that said, well, carbon emissions went down. There was less pollution in the air. And as a result, it was warmer. So I guess we need to get Bill Gates involved so he can do his little mad scientist thing and put pollution in the air to cool the earth. But what happens if the earth goes into a grand solar minimum, or the sun goes into a grand solar minimum, and it gets really, really cold? Then the whole world is Texas, not ready for it. It's crazy. But the scientists want to make it drop by other means. Of course, they don't specify what those means are, but I'm sure that, loving, caring politicians like Andrew Cuomo will come up with something in our best interest. Maybe not. Another thing that's happening, this is something that's not been, believe has not happened in over 1,000 years. The Atlantic Ocean, subtle shifts hit at dramatic dangers. And so what's happening is they think it might be because Greenland ice cap is melting some. It's actually warming the Gulf Stream. And people are concerned. And if that happens, Europe is going to have major problems growing food and that type of thing, because it's the Gulf Stream that really allows them to do a lot of what they do, because Europe is really pretty far north, much further north than we are. I mean, I think when we were in London around Thanksgiving 2 years ago, that it was like dark at 3:45 in the afternoon because it's so far north compared to where we live. Another thing they're coming up with is, this is something that's a little bit concerning, is they're coming up with these drones that are really powerful. They can lock on to someone and track them. They've even used them in some cases. They had a SWAT team and they just put drones up around the person's house for like 8 hours, and the person said, okay, I'm done. I have to give up. I can't fight. Now, listen, that's a good thing. And the guys that are doing this, there's a big article on them in Forbes magazine, and the guy says, well, look, we'll make sure that we won't sell them to anybody that will do something bad with them. Okay. Here is, I think this is the last of I have 2 more COVID things. Pastor Coates up around Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, came up for a bail hearing and appealed it, and the judge said, well, we told you had to agree not to be a pastor. You haven't agreed to that, so you're staying in jail till your trial, which is supposed to take place in May. So another 3 months in prison for Pastor Coates. And boy, I saw people on Facebook just tearing him apart. What a lousy example of a Christian he is, and that type of thing. It's just crazy. Here's one other thing with the COVID. I've never seen anything like this. Chaos strikes global shipping. Shipping costs have gone, it's a pandemic. Everybody's at home, so they're ordering more stuff. China's the only economy that grew last year. But shipping container ships, it's hard to find space on them. Here's a picture of off Long Beach and Los Angeles Harbor. There's no places left out there to anchor to wait till they can unload the containers. So if you're having trouble getting some things that come from overseas, this might explain. Listen to this one, though. Peter Braun's company in New York, Baum Essex, uses factories in China and Southeast Asia to make umbrellas for Costco, cotton bags for Walmart, and ceramics for Bed Bath & Beyond. 6 months ago, he was paying $2,500 to ship a 40-foot container to California. We just paid $67,000 to ship that one container. This is the highest freight rate that they have seen in 45 years in the business. In early September, he waited 90 days to secure space on a ship for a container of wicker chairs and tables. This is also going on. Global spending on weapons reached a record high in 2020. That comes from a IISS report called the Military Balance. The U.S. still leads the way. China is second. We're several times above what China is. So now I'm going to look at the Middle East. We're going to try to take a real quick run through of this. And you know that that is not likely to happen. So I'm going to sort of set the stage strategically. So we're going to focus on Israel, Iran, Turkey, Russia, and the things that are going on around there. And then we'll finish up with the Pope's visit. And I will do that as soon as my laptop comes back up. Okay, so we'll talk. So let me talk about some of the things that I have slides for in the event that this thing never comes back up. I think I can go kind of from memory, although I have some wonderful graphics. And for some reason, it's just not booting back up. This is very unusual. So anyway, so there's geopolitical things going on. So one of the first things that you'll see, if I had slides up here, the next slide would be that Russia and Iran have been working out another agreement. Now, they had a long-term agreement that was expiring this year. It's supposed to automatically renew, but they entered into a new cybersecurity and pact to share information and counterintelligence. And part of that is because Iran really has some problems. For example, they had their guy who got killed there, Farid, the Iranian nuclear scientist, who was killed by a team. And I have no idea what's going on here. This is bothering me. Does anybody have an extra USB-C cable? I'm sure you just carry one in your wallet. Okay, so Iran and Russia, they've been working on a strategic deal, and they did sign that deal. They're also trying to do their Astana. They're in their 15th round trying to get a new constitution for Syria, which is being a little bit difficult to achieve because Syria won't participate or is not a willing participant. Turkey continues to do a lot of things that it's, for example, Erdogan's putting in place a new constitution. I think I might have mentioned that 1 or 2 weeks ago. He just kind of came out of the blue with this, but this is what these power-hungry tyrants like to do to maintain themselves in office. He has an election next year. He changed the Constitution to allow him to run for president, made the president the most powerful person instead of the prime minister. And now he's going to have to change that around. It's the same thing that Putin did in Russia, along with building his $1.2 billion palace down there on the Black Sea. Turkey also came out and said, hey, we're going to enter into a maritime deal with Egypt. You know, we've got the one with Libya. We're going to do one with Egypt, and we want to do one with Israel because we just want to get along with everybody. But what they're trying to do is they're trying to take over the Eastern Med. So they're ready to sign this deal with Cairo, but there's a lot of people, analysts, that are coming out and saying, you know what, I don't really think that this is what Turkey and Egypt are not really talking. We're not really going to get into this agreement.
We're still recording, but our entire internet connection out of the building just went down.
Okay.
All 3 platforms.
Okay.
Just keep going.
Okay. And now I didn't do that one.
Neither did I.
I know. It's Okay, so next week we start with the Middle East, and then hopefully we'll get all the way through one of these without any problems. So this will all be up on YouTube. Apologize for any problems and platforming. And if you're sending me messages right now, I'm not responding to them because I'm doing this. So here's what happened. There's a thing called the Directorate of Religious Affairs in Turkey. And what they did was they really came out and they changed the name of it. And now they've added it to Jerusalem and the Umrah. That's what is going to be it's called. So it shows you that what Turkey really has designs on is Jerusalem. They want to reconstitute the Ottoman Empire. That's what they want to do. Turkish President Erdogan's decision to change the name of the Directorate of Religious Affairs to the Directorate of Jerusalem and Umrah Affairs isn't about semantics but substance. Erdogan views himself as a successor to the line of Ottoman sultans. He wants to restore the empire of old and sees himself as responsible for Jerusalem from the Islamic perspective. In his own eyes, Erdogan is the successor to Salah al-Din and Suleiman the Magnificent, and the Turks are the grandchildren of the two. So this is why Erdogan has adhered to the dream of a Muslim caliphate with Jerusalem as its capital. He's introduced Ottoman languages studies in Turkish schools, and he receives visiting leaders and dignitaries with an honor guard wearing old Ottoman caliphate uniforms. From his point of view, Jerusalem is under occupation, and that is of utmost importance after Mecca and Medina. That's the third holiest city, even though not mentioned in the Quran, and it's really kind of a later invention. The other thing that Turkey is doing is this is a graph showing the military aircraft flights with troops and supplies between Istanbul and Libya and Damascus and Syria and Libya. So what's happening is Russia's the blue. They're sending troops in. This is 2019 and 2020. And this is not all flights, by the way. And Turkey is taking them, getting rebels out of Syria, taking them up to Istanbul, and flying them to Libya. So you have Russia and Libya, or Turkey going at it in Libya, although there's some ceasefires that come and go. The next thing that I want to talk about is a incident that happened off the coast of Israel. There's a video of the Ministry of Environmental Affairs, and what she's saying is, maybe that's the video that caused everything. I'm going to shut that down because you'll start having seizures. So what has happened is that there was a big oil spill in Israel that fouled a lot of the beaches. So the Ministry of Environmental Affairs, Environmental Protection in Israel, she came out and said, listen, this was caused by an Iranian tanker. This was a deliberate act of terrorism against our coastline. And what you can find is you can look online and you can find this Iranian tanker, and they track it. You can see that they have it tracking as it goes up the Suez Canal. And what it did was it was loaded up at the Karg Island refinery facility in Iran, at the north end of the Persian Gulf. Sailed down the Persian Gulf. As it's sailing down the Persian Gulf, it turned off its transponder. And I don't know if you know this, there's websites out there called tanker trackers and that type of thing. It's like airplanes. Any airplane that has a transponder, you can find all kinds of information about them. I mean, you can see all the ships in the world that have a transponder on in real time. It's an amazing thing. And by the way, though, they're going to everything, that with a COVID pass and a green pass and that type of thing, your information will be secure and nobody will know about it. So anyway, this thing stayed off the coast of Israel for a couple of days. Now, it's become very controversial in Israel. Did this tanker intentionally release crude oil into the water that washed up on the beaches that has really fouled a lot of the coastline of Israel? And they're out cleaning up. I saw videos of IDF soldiers out there picking up this tar. And I think the ultimate test would be, well, test the tar and see if it's like the crude oil, because all crude oil in the world has kind of a fingerprint, because it's not the chemical makeup of it is. And people know if there's an oil spill someplace, they can pretty much tell where that oil originated, because it has a specific chemical footprint or chemical print or whatever they call it. Chemical composition. Well, they haven't done that yet. And so the Mossad and other people saying that the Minister of Environmental Protection is crazy. She doesn't know what she's talking about. She hasn't tested this. People are saying, well, that's kind of why would they do that? How do they know that the oil is going to end up on the beaches of Israel? I mean, you can dump it in the water of Israel, but what about currents and winds and that type of thing? And my response to that is, maybe this was a test by the Iranians to see if it would work. And this thing was off the coast of Haifa for a couple of days, and they actually show the plume as it kind of goes, it develops in the Mediterranean and goes towards the coast of Israel. And it seems to track where this ship was at one point. And the other thing is, there's been no other alternative explanation offered by anybody for it. I mean, you don't have a bunch of crude oil showing up on beaches unless somebody spilled it somewhere. And usually it's spilled close to where it washes up. So and so everybody's tracking this thing. This is what's happened. It then went up to, I don't think it dumped its entire load because it wanted to have credibility that, well, it went up to the port in Syria and was up there for a couple weeks and unloaded its thing. So here's a satellite shot of the tanker off the coast of Syria, which was raising another point that I wanted to make, because I think this is significant also. You've noticed that Elon Musk's organization, Starlink, has been putting up, and I think Gates is involved in this too, is putting up satellites everywhere to bring internet to everybody on the planet. This, I believe, is the nerve system for the beast system that's going to come about, because everybody's going to be connected. And so when you look at these things, I mean, it's really cool. I can track this ship, and there it is off the coast of Syria, and we have satellite, pictures of all this. But it's also troubling that, just like the drone guy says, we're only going to sell it to people who will use it for good purposes. Okay. You might be smart enough to make up these drones and start a company, but you don't have the wisdom to understand what's going to be used with your stuff. And of course, Greenpeace, and I think part of this is because it's Israel saying that this is Iranian terrorism. Greenpeace has immediately come out and said, well, this is not the oil spill from an Iranian tanker. Like now they're all in big support of Iranian tankers, I guess. Doesn't make any sense. Here's that thing I referred to earlier. Iran and Russia have signed an Information Security Cooperation Pact. Now we're going to get into a few things about Israel. So here's an article in this morning's Jerusalem Post where the denominated Vice President of the United States is calling Netanyahu. And what they're talking is about the International Criminal Court, and they're moving ahead with investigating Israel for potential war crimes against Palestinians. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, but it's going to be in 3 areas. It's going to be the Lebanon War back in 2006. It's going to be the Gaza War in 2014 or 2016, one of those. And it's also going to be building settlements. They're coming after the leadership. Now, they're only investigating it, but the International Criminal Court, the ICC, has said that they will go forward with this. And the other thing that you need to know is at the time that this is happening is Israel is, even though the Biden administration gives lip service to the fact that we still support Israel, in reality, the reality is that they're doing a lot of things to undermine that and to support Iran. So here is an article, front page this morning's Jerusalem Post. U.S. says this: allies don't get a blank check to oppose our interests. That means Our allies like Israel don't get a blank check. You just can't go out and do what you want. You have to take our interest into consideration, even though they're in the Middle East and we're not, and they have a real problem, and we're going to tell them exactly what to do. And I have a problem with this, and I'll explain a little bit more why later. So here is the new 24-page Interim National Security Strategic Guidance, which the Obama administration just released this week. And here is a quote from it. It talks about, in the Middle East, we will maintain our ironclad commitment to Israel's security. And I say, no, there's cognitive dissonance all over this document. But down here, see what the highlighted sentence says? But we do not believe that military force is the answer to the region's challenges, and we will not give our partners in the Middle East a blank check to pursue policy at odds with American interests and values. Well, that's helpful. And Caroline Glick has a superb article in here in the Israel Hayom newspaper, that newspaper that has that at the top of it. I always get criticized no matter what I say. And I'm fine with that. Here's her article. Biden abandons the Middle East. The Biden administration is the most ideologically rigid and radical administration in U.S. history. Its actions have served to undermine the Accords, talking about the Abraham Accords, by removing their American foundations. And so what's happening, and you see this with the DNI report, Department of National Intelligence report on tying the Khashoggi murder to Mohammed bin Salman, and he may have been guilty of it. I'm not saying that. But I'm just saying is the report was, looking at it from a legal standpoint, in my view, the report was a bit fuzzy on tying him to that. It certainly wasn't good proof, wasn't solid proof. But what Biden and Harris are trying to do is tear down everything that Trump tried to do. And they're doing, even though it doesn't make any sense. On the surface, she says, the Biden administration is interested in promoting peace. President Biden and Secretary of State Anthony Blinken have praised the Abraham Accords, as well they should. But what they're saying is they're doing everything in the background to undermine it. They stopped the sale of the F-35s to the United Arab Emirates. They've stopped sales to the Saudis. And so they're doing everything to undermine that, because the thing that they want most is to appease Iran. That's always what's behind what they do. So get Caroline Glick's article. Let me see, there's one paragraph I wanted to read here. Taken together, the Obama administration's moves make clear that beyond paying occasional lip service to the Abraham Accords, ending the Arab and Islamic world's conflict with Israel and forging a wider peace between them is not a goal it wishes to pursue. Indeed, for Biden and his advisors, Arab-Israel peace is an impediment to their ideologically motivated efforts to empower the PLO, Palestinians, and Iran. And she is exactly 100% correct on that. One of the things that they've done is this week they have allowed, there was a law passed in Congress back in the 90s that said, if you ever looked at Google Earth, you'll see that you don't have good high-resolution images of Israel. It's hard to find good high-resolution images of Israel. So the Trump administration started to look into changing that, getting higher resolution images of Israel from satellites and able to publish them. And the Biden administration has now said, yeah, we're going to allow that to happen. And the first thing that comes up is, oh, look, they're building at the Dimona reactor. They're expanding that. Israel's inconsistent. We have to appease Iran, et cetera, et cetera. It's been, so this is a big deal because Israel's been very protective of its security, even though I would like higher resolution images of Israel for the things that I do. It's kind of frustrating at times. So there's been this back and forth between the U.S. and Israel on the one hand and Iran on the others. There's these attacks that take place by Israel and Iran, or in Syria against Iranian targets. The U.S. has sent missiles and bombed some Iranian targets. And so there's this tension, and everybody is concerned, what does it take to have this thing just blow up into a big war in the Middle East? And we know that that's coming. We just don't know when, and we don't know exactly what the trigger is. So the Biden administration bombed some facilities in Syria that were Iranian targets. So here's the picture before, and the Biden administration came out and said, look how tough we are. We're bombing, empty buildings. Because it was like 11 buildings were destroyed. And if you look at them, they're just like, the little metal buildings that you put up quick in your backyard or stuff to store, or bigger one to store stuff. They're not really big installations or anything. So that's happening. And then you have, again, Iran has attacked the Israeli ship. Gantz came out and said, yep, this was an attack on an Israeli ship by Iran. And so they have the attack on the ship. You have the oil spill. You have, they continue to supply Hezbollah and others with arms to build missiles that can attack them. Kochavi, the head of the IDF, has come out and said, listen, we're ready. We're getting ready. Gantz did an interview this week with Fox News. I'm going to play it for you. I want you to see, he holds up a map at the end, but it appears that the map was classified because it's blurred out. It's kind of an interesting thing. He showed it to the Fox guy, but here's the interview with Defense Minister Danny Gantz.
Recently, the chief of staff of
Whoops,
said
hang on.
that Israel is preparing to strike Iranian nuclear. Recently, the chief of...
Okay, now we got this. Sorry about that.
Harvey said that Israel is preparing to strike Iranian nuclear targets if needed. Are those preparations complete?
They will never complete. Before the only time of completing them will be the time that we will actually conduct them. Till then, we will continue to build them, to improve them. This is something that any military needs to do. We are working on it. We have them in our hands, of course, but we will continue and constantly improving them to the highest professional level possible. But it's very important to remember what you have just said, Ray. The Iranians are breaking everything that was agreed with them. They are bluffing in any aspect that one can think. They are spreading it all across Iran. And this is something that they are trying to build, or either to use it, God forbid, or to use it as a deterrence canopy to enable them to even further the pressure on the regional aspects that we have been talking about. Therefore, the Iranian nuclear aspiration must be stored. If the world stops them before, it's very much good. But if not, we must stand independently and we must defend ourselves by ourselves.
How many missiles right now do you believe Hezbollah has?
Hundreds of thousands, but let me show you something which I think is very important. This is a map of Lebanon. What you see there is ground forces, missiles, headquarters,
What you don't see.
launching sites, etc. Everything is aimed to civilian targets, and it is being conducted from civilian infrastructure. That's the case in Lebanon. Now you tell me what's going to happen to Lebanon.
This is a target list for you.
This is a target map. Each one of them have been checked legally, operationally, intelligence-wise, and we are ready to fight.
And they will. So they were concerned about these missiles and guided missiles being manufactured, even ballistic missiles being manufactured in Lebanon and Syria and being launched into Israel. Now, last Sunday night, 60 Minutes, I don't know if you saw it, had a special on the Iranian ballistic missile attack on the U.S. Al-Assad Air Base in Iraq. And they've released, part of that, they released this video from the Department of Defense. And what you see is, remember, this was in response. This was about a week after we had killed Soleimani with a rocket attack from a drone outside the Baghdad airport. So Iran took revenge. And the one thing you notice is that these missiles were highly accurate. So, for example, the things, and you'll see the print up there, they're going after the dining facilities or the showers or the barracks. These things flew in and they hit their targets. They were precise. I would highly recommend go to 60 Minutes channel on YouTube and watch that 13-minute segment that they did last Sunday evening. I don't think I was ever, it really heightened for me, even though I know this stuff, it helped me understand what Israel is worried about and what they are facing. These soldiers, there were 100 soldiers. There were about 2,000 soldiers on base. They got about a 2-hour warning. The warning came and said, hey, they're fueling up their ballistic missiles in Iran, and it appears that the target is Al Assad Air Base, which is, I think, about 100 miles outside of Baghdad. They don't have the bunkers there. They were talking about how there were 40 soldiers trying to pile on a bunker that maybe could accommodate 10 people. They were scared to death. They gave them vehicles and said, drive out into the desert and get away from the base. And the one lady soldier, I can't remember her name, he said, well, what's your defense for a ballistic missile attack like that? She said, there isn't one. And we all thought we were going to die. Now, nobody did. And a number of the soldiers said it was only by the grace of God or the hand of God that we did not die, or that we were able to have enough warning to get out of the thing. But this is what Israel is facing. This is why the Iranian threat is so real, because they have developed, you saw the videos right there. They aimed for they knew our barracks, they knew the dining hall, they knew the recreation area where people would congregate, and they hit them with missiles. And if there's in the video, these are craters that are like 12 feet deep of the ones that missed. It was pretty frightening. So now, at the same time all that is going on, Russia came out this week and released a report, and they said, listen, Israel, we're tired of you bombing in Syria all the time, and we're just about out of patience with it, and we're going to do something about it. Their special envoy of the president, Alexander Lavrentiev, made a report in which he emphasized the unwillingness of the Israeli side to fulfill the agreements reached between Israel and Russia to de-escalate the situation in Syria. This envoy said that Moscow's patience has completely dried up, and if Israel does not give up aggressive actions against the Arab Republic in the near future, Russia will be ready to attack Israeli aircraft, not only over Syria, but also in the airspace over neighboring countries or in international airspace. That's a pretty significant change for them to have said that. And the quote is, sooner or later, the cup of patience, this is a quote, including the Syrian government, may be overflowing, and a retaliatory strike will follow, which will accordingly lead to a new round of tension. These attacks must be stopped. They are counterproductive. We hope that the Israeli side will hear our concerns, including concerns about the possible escalation of violence in Syria. And then yesterday what happened was that there was these attacks that took place in northern Syria, far northern Syria, which is essentially a transit point for oil. Now, as best as my research can tell, and since I found out about this last evening, is the oil comes from the oil fields that the United States controls. It's smuggled up through these Syrian rebels, and there's a transit point there in northern Israel, in the northern Aleppo province. And so there was a ballistic missile attack on that. Now, that is an area where Iran has not really established a foothold yet, but Turkey has. So everybody's pretty sure that it was Russia or Syria or both of them that sent the ballistic missiles into this thing. And the damage is just unbelievable. There were about 200 oil tankers there. They were all destroyed. It's a mess. So this happened. You see the little orange dot up there. That's the Euphrates River that comes down. Dar al-Zor is over 100 miles away, where the U.S. controls those oil fields. So the oil goes up to there, crosses the Euphrates, and then it's transited into Turkey. Here's a little video that shows the attack that took place. You know, it's interesting now, everything happens. This is a relatively poor area in the midst of a civil war, and people are taking video of the war with their cell phones and posting them on Twitter. It's a very strange world. It changes sort of the concept of citizen journalism. So here's another picture of that terrible attack that took place. You see the destruction that took place. Now listen, this is a message to both Israel and the United States. So Russia comes out and says, listen, our patience is at an end. We're going to put a stop to this. There's this back and forth between the U.S. and Iran in Syria, exchanging, well, they attack us in Iraq, we attack them in Syria, this bombing back and forth. And so Russia's come in and said, listen, this is what's going to happen if you don't do that. Again, go watch the 60 Minutes piece and you will have an understanding as to why Israel considers this such a serious threat. A couple more things. I will talk about the ICC next week, the International Criminal Court. Here is sort of a recent poll of what's going on in Israel. They have election in 2 weeks from Tuesday, on the 23rd, and it's a mess. And right now, it doesn't look like anybody's going to be able to put a coalition together of 61 Knesset members. And they're horse trading and everything, and it's just, it's a mess. Here is the Chief Justice of the South African Supreme Court did a Zoom conference with the Jerusalem Post last year, and he essentially quoted Genesis chapter 12, said, I will bless them that bless thee and curse them that curse thee, and said he supported Israel. And now he's being told that he needs to apologize for that, and I think if he doesn't, they're going to try to get rid of him. The Chief Justice of the South African Supreme Court, he's a Christian. At the same time is this, I will mention the International Criminal Court briefly. They're coming after the Israeli leadership. That would include Gantz, Netanyahu, former defense ministers and that type of thing that participated in these things. Now, they said we're going to investigate Palestinians also, but really everybody thinks they're going to focus on Israel. How quickly they get this together, I don't know. But the troubling part of it is, part of what they're going after is the building of settlements. And in Israel, they built settlements, and this is of the West, what they call the West Bank. And the yellowish area is Area C that's under Israeli control, and the blue area, well, you can get the map legend and figure out what it is. But the biblical heartland of it, this is the biblical heartland of Israel. This is Judea and Samaria. This is where the biblical heartland was. And I want to remind you what happened was, and so here is a picture of Obama at Perez's funeral in 2016, October 2016. And he had a speech, a eulogy for Perez, Shimon Peres. And the original draft of it said, to be given in Jerusalem, Israel. That was distributed to the press. 6 hours later, one of these woke idiots that are now probably running things in the Biden White House sent out a different draft of the eulogy with Jerusalem specifically crossed out. That's the attitude. And then that led to the press secretary at the time, Josh Earnest, and here's a video of him down in the lower right-hand corner, doing a press conference, a press briefing about the Israeli announcement that they were going to add some homes at Shiloh. Shiloh, the home of the tabernacle. This is in October 2016. And
the United States has long believed, and we continue.
Now listen, this is Josh Earnest. We lovingly refer to him around here as joshing earnestly, because that seemed to be what he did as the press secretary. So here's what he had to say about Israel building at Shiloh. And this is a picture of aerial of Shiloh at the top that shows where the tabernacle of God stood for almost 400 years. Whoops. Well, okay, here we go.
The United States has long believed, and we continue to believe, that it is within the clear interest of Israel's national security to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in a way that allows a democratic and Jewish state of Israel to live side by side in peace and security with a viable and contiguous Palestinian state. And the announcement of these settlements makes that national security priority harder to achieve. One other thing about this, Mark, that distinguishes this announcement from so many others is the location. This settlement's planned location is deep in the West Bank. In fact, the settlement location is far closer to Jordan than it is to Israel. And it would effectively link a string of outposts that could divide the West Bank. And it would make the
yeah, blah, blah, blah. Do you notice how he has trouble with it? Remember how he had these long pauses? And I think that's a psychological thing, because when you're telling a whopper, sometimes even it's hard to get it out articulately, unless you're really good, like his boss was. Then his boss didn't even break a sweat, but he used to sweat like crazy when he was doing these things. So listen, Shiloh is not deep. It is up there in what they call the West Bank. It's in Samaria. Okay, it's 40-minute drive north of Jerusalem, up near Nablus. And this is right there where those flags are. That's where the tabernacle stood. Remember the stories of Samuel hearing the voice of God? That happened right there. You can go stand on that place today. And there's a Jewish settlement there, Jewish settlers, and they want to build more. And they're saying, oh no, my goodness, you can't do that. I have to speak about this just briefly. So this is what the International Criminal Court, though, wants to do, is they want to go after Israeli leaders and settlement leaders for having the audacity to build in Judea and Samaria. So the Pope went to Iraq, and he, so first of all he went to Najaf. Now this is pretty significant. This is the aerial view of Najaf. This is the Mosque of Ali. This is probably the second most important person in Islam. He was I believe, the son-in-law of Muhammad. He took over for Muhammad after it was done. Go back out, because I want to show, so Najaf is that black 3D picture right there in the middle. You see all these places up here just to the, outside let me get my laser pointer. Okay, see this area up here? That is a cemetery. It is the largest, this is where the Pope went. He went to see the head of the most important Shiite Ayatollah Imam in the world, Sistani. Went to his house yesterday. They had a meeting in Najaf. This is to Shia Islam, this is the fourth holiest site on the planet. Mecca, Medina, Al-Aqsa in Jerusalem, and Najaf, the Mosque of Ali. They claim that Ali is buried there, and also buried there are a couple Bible guys named Adam and Noah. It's visited in normal times by over 8 million pilgrims a year. It is the largest cemetery on planet Earth. Over 5 million people are estimated to be buried there. So you need to understand that when the Pope went there to go to this place, this was not a one-off. This was a very significant thing that he did to try to unite the Abrahamic, what he calls the Abrahamic religions. I will discuss more this week. So he met with Sistani. And the one thing that he noticed, that Sistani said, we're going to do peace and security. The Pope did a prayer, and he said, well, we're all children of Abraham. He said that later. But even Al-Sistani was saying we should live in security and peace. This is the common frame. This is a biblical term that people are throwing around. So this was a very, very important thing prophetically that the Pope did. So he went to Iraq, went to Najaf, and you need to understand the seminary in Najaf in Iraq is where the Ayatollah Khomeini, the founder of the Islamic Republic of Iran, was trained, and where the Ayatollah Khamenei, the current supreme leader of Iran, was trained. And Khamenei's father was also a Muslim cleric, and he was trained there as well. So this is the Pope meeting with the number one, Ayatollah Khomeini runs Iran, wants to run Iraq, but the religious leader of Shiites worldwide is largely known to be Sistani. And he's 90 years old, and they sat there in this meeting like this for like 3 hours. So after he was done, by the way, there was one guy from the Quran and the Bible that never came up in all of the discussions and talks and speeches and prayers and everything. Who do you think was never mentioned yesterday? Jesus? Never mentioned, never brought up. And this is what Robert Spencer points out in PJ Media today. Listen, this is how Christians appease Muslims. We talk in their terms, never ours, when we get together. So then after that, he went to to the ziggurat there. They had a thing set up, and he did that, and he prayed there. And this was like a couple hours and he droned on for over an hour. And he's getting pretty frail, the Pope, because they were having to help him up and down from chairs and that type of thing. And here was his prayer: Almighty God, our Creator, you love our human family. We, children of Abraham, ask you to welcome you into our abode of peace and light all victims of violence and war. And he even read from Genesis, but he never mentioned the name Isaac. Mentioned Abraham, but never Isaac. Why? Because that would offend the Muslims, because they believed that who was to be sacrificed on Mount Moriah was Ishmael, who the father of the Arabs is. And so he never mentioned Jesus, never prayed in Jesus' name, or anything like that. And then the Associated Press, in their article, when they talked about it, they said, well, Iraq there were no Jews there. And it appears that the Jewish community in Iraq has been decimated, just like the Christian community has been decimated with the wars over the last few years. And the AP is sort of like completely clueless that the Jews weren't decimated. They were driven out of Iraq back in 1948 by the predecessors to Saddam Hussein, who hated the Jews too. So here this morning, the Pope was at Mosul, up in the former Nineveh, biblical Nineveh. So very significant thing that happened. You should look at the articles and see what happened. But this is the Pope trying to unite the Abraham faiths. We have the Abraham Accords. We have the Abraham faiths. They're all connected. I think they're all prophetically significant. I think it means we live at a very interesting time. So we're going to wrap up now. Again, I'll be doing an interview on Minute to Midnight this week, Prophecy Roundtable on Thursday. We'll talk a little bit more about some of these things on Sunday, and hopefully I will have a new power cord so I don't have my thing run out of power. We'll call this the pretending we were in Texas during the freeze update. It does, unless somebody's fraying my cord on purpose, so I shut up and get out of here earlier. I don't know. I can't disclose the next possibility. So let's pray and let's go. Father, thanks for your word. We pray, Lord, that you will help us to be aware, watching what is going on at this very significant time of history, but always preparing our hearts to be with you, whether that happens through death or rapture. But Lord, we need to be ready to meet you. We need to purify our hearts, sanctify ourselves. And I just pray that you will help us to also have opportunities to share the glorious gospel of Jesus Christ with others. Bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.